33 hours. That is how long the average French worker spends at their job in a typical week. The average German works 35. The average Dutch worker works just 30. The average American works 47. That gap does not sound dramatic until you do the math across a full year. The difference between a 35-hour European week and a 47-hour American week is roughly 600 additional working hours per year. 600 hours is the equivalent of 15 extra 40-hour work weeks. The average American works nearly 4 additional months per year compared to the average German doing the same kind of job, not earning 4 extra months of pay necessarily, just working 4 extra months of time. If you have ever finished a workday at 7 p.m., checked your email one more time before bed, worked through a lunch you ate at your desk, and felt a quiet guilt about taking a vacation day you had technically already earned, you have already experienced the second-order effect of this difference. American workers spend more hours working than workers in any other wealthy nation on Earth, and most of them assume this is simply normal because they have never experienced anything else. Here is the punchline up front. Americans do not work longer hours because Americans are more productive or more ambitious. They work longer hours because of 3 things that stacked on top of each other over 80 years. A 1938 labor law with a loophole that was never closed, the complete absence of any federal vacation law, and an employment system that legally allows a company to demand unlimited hours from a salaried worker. Take any one of those 3 away, and the American overwork problem shrinks dramatically. Take all 3 away, which is essentially what Europe did, and you get the shorter, legally protected work week that the rest of the developed world treats as a basic standard. And here is the wildest part of the whole story. The 40-hour work week that Americans think of as the standard is not actually guaranteed by law for most of the workforce. It is a suggestion that applies fully only to certain hourly workers. For tens of millions of salaried American employees, there is no legal maximum on how many hours an employer can require, and no legal requirement to pay anything additional for those extra hours. Hidden Systems explains the everyday things in homes and daily life that look like personal circumstances, but are actually the result of laws written or deliberately left unwritten decades ago. Subscribe so you do not miss the next one. Now let me walk you back to where this started. In 1938, the United States passed the Fair Labor Standards Act. It was landmark legislation. It established the first federal minimum wage. It restricted child labor. And it created the 40-hour work week by requiring employers to pay time and a half overtime for hours worked beyond 40 in a week. That overtime requirement is the entire reason the 40-hour week exists in America. The law did not ban working more than 40 hours. It made working more than 40 hours expensive for the employer, which discouraged it. If a company had to pay 150% of the normal wage for every hour past 40, they had a strong financial incentive to keep workers at 40. But the law contained an exemption. Certain categories of employees were exempt from the overtime requirement. The original idea was that high-level executives, professionals, and administrators who controlled their own schedules and earned high salaries did not need overtime protection. The exemption was meant to be narrow. It did not stay narrow. Over the following decades, the salary threshold that determined who counted as exempt was not consistently updated for inflation. The categories of who qualified as an exempt executive or professional or administrator were interpreted more and more broadly. Job titles were created specifically to push workers into exempt status. By the 2000s and 2010s, a worker could be classified as an exempt manager, given a modest salary, and legally required to work 50, 60, or 70 hours per week with no additional pay whatsoever. The 40-hour week still technically existed in the law. For an enormous and growing share of the American workforce, it no longer applied to them. First cause, the overtime exemption was allowed to expand. When the Fair Labor Standards Act was written, the salary level above which a worker could be classified as exempt was set at a point that covered only genuinely high earners. Because that threshold was not automatically tied to inflation, its real value eroded every year that lawmakers did not update it. At various points, the threshold fell so low that workers earning modest middle-class salaries could legally be classified as exempt executives and required to work unlimited hours. A worker labeled an assistant manager at a retail store, earning a salary barely above the poverty line for a family, could legally be scheduled for 55 hours a week with zero overtime pay. The title did the legal work. The actual job duties often involved the same tasks as the hourly employees, but the exempt classification removed the financial penalty that would otherwise discourage the employer from extending hours. Here I have to admit something. When I started researching this video, I assumed Americans simply chose to work more out of ambition or culture, the hustle mindset. The data forced me to throw that assumption out completely. The longer hours are not primarily a cultural choice. They are the predictable result of a legal structure where a large share of the workforce can be required to work unlimited hours at no additional cost to the employer. When extending a salaried exempt worker from 40 to 55 hours costs the company nothing extra, the rational behavior for the company is to extend the hours. The worker did not choose 55 hours. The legal incentive structure produced 55 hours. The behavior did not precede the system. The system produced the behavior. Second cause, there is no federal vacation law. The United States is the only advanced economy on Earth with no national law requiring employers to provide any paid vacation days at all. Not a minimum. Not a single guaranteed day. Zero. In the European Union, the Working Time Directive legally guarantees every worker a minimum of 20 paid vacation days per year, and most member countries exceed that. France guarantees 30. Germany guarantees a minimum of 20, but most workers receive 25 to 30. The United Kingdom guarantees 28. These are not company perks. They are legal rights that an employer cannot take away. In the United States, paid vacation is entirely at the discretion of the employer. The average American private sector worker receives around 11 paid vacation days after a year of service, and many receive fewer or none. Approximately 1 in 4 American workers receive 0 paid vacation days. And even among those who receive vacation days, a large share do not use all of them, because workplace culture, job insecurity, and workload make taking the full allotment feel risky. The math compounds. A European worker has 25 to 30 guaranteed days off plus a shorter standard week. An American worker has roughly 11 discretionary days off plus a longer standard week. The annual difference in total hours not working reaches into the hundreds. Third cause, at-will employment removes the worker's leverage. In nearly every American state, employment is at will. This means an employer can terminate an employee at any time, for almost any reason or for no reason at all, with no notice required. The worker can also leave at any time. On the surface, this sounds balanced. In practice, it shifts enormous power to the employer. When an employer can fire a worker at any moment with no severance and no cause required, the worker has very little leverage to refuse additional hours, decline weekend work, or insist on using their vacation. Saying no to an unreasonable schedule carries the implicit risk of termination. The worker who works the extra hours without complaint is safer than the worker who pushes back. Most European countries do not have at-will employment. They have legal frameworks requiring just cause for dismissal, mandatory notice periods, and severance requirements. A German employer cannot simply fire a worker for declining to work 15 unpaid extra hours. The legal protection gives the European worker the practical ability to enforce the limits the law already grants them. Compare those two careers for a second. A German engineer works a legally protected 35 to 40-hour week, receives 28 guaranteed paid vacation days, cannot be fired without cause and notice, and faces no financial penalty for using every vacation day. Over a 40-year career, the structural protections add up to years of additional non-working time compared to an American peer. An American engineer in an exempt salaried role can be required to work 50-plus hours with no overtime, receives discretionary vacation that averages 11 days, can be terminated at any time without cause, and often does not use the full vacation allotment due to workload and job insecurity. Same profession, same century of labor development. Two completely different relationships between the worker and time. One protects the worker's hours, the other monetizes them. Neither is technically wrong, but they are not interchangeable. Stack those three causes: the expanded overtime exemption, the total absence of a vacation law, and at-will employment removing worker leverage, and you get the modern American work week. Structure so demanding that the country leads the developed world in annual hours worked. So normalized that workers feel guilty using vacation they legally earned. So entrenched that proposals to update overtime rules or mandate vacation are fought every time they appear. Now here is where it gets weird. The hours keep climbing. Remote work, instead of reducing hours, extended them for many salaried workers. The boundary between work and home dissolved. The expectation of after-hours email responsiveness grew. Studies through 2025 found that many remote and hybrid American workers report working more total hours than they did in the office, not fewer, because the commute that once marked the end of the workday disappeared and was filled with additional work. The American salaried professional now treats the 40-hour week the way 18th century laborers treated daylight. It is a starting point, not a limit. There is one detail in the historical record that reveals the whole logic of how this happened. In 1956, Vice President Richard Nixon publicly predicted that Americans would soon enjoy a 4-day work week, made possible by rising productivity and automation. The prediction was widely shared and broadly believed. American worker productivity did rise enormously over the following 70 years. It roughly quadrupled. By the logic of 1956, the work week should have shrunk dramatically as productivity climbed. It did not shrink. It expanded. Read that backwards. The productivity gains that were supposed to buy American workers more free time did not translate into shorter hours, because no legal structure required that the gains be shared as time. In European countries where shorter weeks and mandatory vacation were written into law, productivity gains were partially converted into time off. In the United States, with no such legal requirement, the productivity gains were absorbed almost entirely as output and profit, while hours stayed long. The behavior did not precede the system. The system determined who received the benefit of rising productivity. The economists of the 1950s and 1960s who predicted the leisure society assumed that rising productivity would automatically reduce working hours, the way it visibly did across most of Western Europe in the second half of the 20th century. They could not have imagined that American productivity would rise exactly as predicted, that European workers would convert much of that gain into shorter weeks and longer vacations, and that American workers would end up working more hours than almost any other developed nation precisely because no law ever required the productivity dividend to be paid back to them in time. Every additional hour an American works beyond the European average this year is, in a sense, a productivity gain that the legal system never required anyone to return to the worker. How many hours did you actually work last week? Be honest with yourself before you type. And if you get paid vacation, how many days did you actually use last year out of how many you were given? Drop the real numbers in the comments. I want to see how this varies across this channel. I read every single one.